The pot roast had been in the oven since 2 o'clock. I remember that detail because I remember thinking, as I slid it in, that 4 hours was exactly enough time. Enough time for the meat to go tender, for the smell to fill the house, for everything to feel, if only for one evening, like a family. I do that sometimes. I build small hopes around ordinary things. A good roast, a clean tablecloth, the right candles, as if the right atmosphere might soften whatever was coming. I should have known better. After 36 years of being Derek's mother, I should have known better. The house at 412 Birchwood Lane was not large, but it was warm. Or it had been, once. That evening, as I carried the casserole dish to the table, I moved through rooms I had furnished with money I had scraped together, past curtains I had chosen on a Tuesday morning at Home Goods, past a rug I had ordered online during a sale I waited 3 weeks for. The framed photo in the hallway, Derek at 17, gap-toothed and squinting into the sun, I had bought that frame. I had chosen that photo. I had hung it exactly 4.5 feet from the floor because Derek, at the time, said anything higher looked pretentious. I had forgotten that detail until right then. Standing in the hallway with oven mitts on my hands, I suddenly remembered. Even the height of that picture frame had been my decision, adjusted for someone else's preference. That should have told me something. Savannah arrived first, the way she always did. My daughter had her father's punctuality, and thank God, none of his other qualities. She came through the door with a bottle of sparkling cider and her youngest on her hip, kissed my cheek, and immediately started helping without being asked. That was Savannah. She just did things, quietly, without applause, without expectation. "It smells incredible in here, Mom," she said, setting little Grace down on the kitchen floor, where the child promptly toddled toward the dog bowl that hadn't held a dog in 6 years. "Pot roast," I said. "Your grandmother's recipe." "Derek's going to inhale it." She smiled, but there was something careful in her eyes. Something she was watching. I noticed it the way you notice a crack in a ceiling. Small, easily ignored, hard to stop seeing once you've seen it. Richard and Deborah arrived 20 minutes later. I want to be precise about Deborah Payne, because imprecision would be unfair, and despite everything, I believe in fairness. She was not a stupid woman. She was not even, in the most technical sense, a cruel one. She was something more efficient than cruel. She was strategic. She had a way of making you feel like a visitor in rooms you'd paid for, and she exercised that gift with the consistency of someone who had been practicing it for decades. She walked into the kitchen that evening in a linen blazer and low heels, kissed my cheek without touching it, and said, "Margaret, you look rested," in a tone that somehow made rested sound like irrelevant. Then she took the chair at the far end of the table, the chair I usually sat in, and settled into it with the ease of a woman who had never once in her life been made to feel she didn't belong somewhere. Richard followed her in, already apologizing for something I hadn't noticed. "Traffic," he said. "Construction on Route 9. He hugged me briefly, the way you hug someone you used to know well and now mostly feel guilty about. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn during our marriage, which I had always found more disorienting than comforting. Derek came last. He was living in the house, so coming last to dinner in his own home was, I had long since decided, a choice he made consciously. A small dominance. A way of saying, "I arrive when I'm ready." He came down the stairs in a flannel shirt, phone in hand, barely glancing at the table before dropping into his chair. "Hey," he said, to no one in particular. "Hey yourself," Savannah said. "Your mom's been cooking since noon." "Since 2, I said, and immediately regretted the correction. It made me sound like I was keeping score. Maybe I was. For the first 20 minutes, dinner was ordinary. Grace knocked over her cup twice. Richard asked Derek about his job search in the flat, automatic way of a man fulfilling an obligation, and Derek answered in monosyllables that discouraged further inquiry. Savannah told a story about a difficult parent from her school. She taught 4th grade, and I laughed in the right places and refilled glasses without being asked, because that is what I have always done. I circulate, I smooth, I keep the air from going stale. It was working. I could feel the meal settling into something comfortable. Grace was eating the carrots I'd cut small for her. Savannah was laughing. Even Richard had loosened his collar. Then Savannah mentioned her promotion. She said it modestly, the way she does everything, almost apologetically, as if good news were an imposition. Assistant principal, effective January. The school board had voted unanimously. Her principal had cried, apparently, which made Savannah laugh in the telling. I felt my whole chest fill up. "Savannah," I reached across the table and pressed her hand. "That is just wonderful. I am so proud of you." She ducked her head, pleased and embarrassed. "It's not that big a deal." "It is a big deal," I said firmly. "It is a very big deal, and you are not allowed to minimize it." Grace clapped her hands, not knowing why, just matching the energy in the room. Even Richard smiled, a real one, not the diplomatic version. And then Derek set down his fork. Not loudly, not dramatically. He just placed it on the table beside his plate with a small, deliberate click and leaned back in his chair. The way he looked at me, not at Savannah, at me, was the way you look at something that has been mildly annoying you all evening and has finally crossed a line. "You know," he said, his voice carrying that particular flatness that meant he had been thinking about whatever came next for a while. "It's interesting. Savannah does something and you act like she cured cancer." He picked up his glass. "Meanwhile, you've been sitting in my house every Sunday for 3 years, and I don't think you've once asked how I'm doing." The table went quiet. "Derek," Savannah said, her voice careful and warning. "I'm just saying." He shrugged. "It's a pattern." I kept my voice level. "I ask you how you're doing every time I see you, Derek. You ask the version of me you want to see." He took a long drink of water. "You don't actually listen to the answer." I felt Savannah tense beside me. I felt Deborah adjust slightly in her chair. The small shift of someone getting comfortable for a show. Richard looked at his plate. "I'd like to hear how you're doing," I said. "Right now. Tell me." Something crossed his face. I thought for one moment that he might actually do it, that he might say something true, something that required courage rather than contempt. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I had never let myself fully name before. Dismissal. Pure, clean, total. "Mom," he said, "you don't actually contribute anything real to this family. You know that, right? You just exist here. You show up, you cook, you fuss over things, and we all pretend like it matters." He tilted his head, almost curious about his own words. "You're like furniture. Comfortable, I guess, but furniture." The word landed in the middle of the table like something dropped from a great height. For a moment, I did not fully process it. My mind went somewhere strange and small. The pot roast, still in the kitchen, and whether I had remembered to turn down the oven. That is what shock does sometimes. It sends you somewhere manageable while it handles the damage in another room. Then Savannah said, "What is wrong with you?" Her voice was not loud, but it was shaking, and that shakiness was more devastating than any shout. "How dare you say that to her? How dare you?" Grace looked between them, sensing the electricity without understanding it, and pressed herself against the back of her high chair. "Relax," Derek said. "I'm being honest. She always said she wanted honesty." "That is not honesty," Savannah said. "That is cruelty, and you know the difference." Deborah had picked up her wine glass and was holding it with both hands, watching, not intervening, not uncomfortable, watching. The way someone watches a film they've seen before and know they enjoy. Richard cleared his throat. "Maybe we should—" "I think Margaret understands what I mean," Derek said, still looking at me. "She's practical. She gets it." I looked at my son. I want to describe this moment carefully, because it matters. I did not look at him with hatred. I looked at him the way you look at a document you have been misreading for years, when you finally put on the right glasses and see what it actually says. I saw him clearly. Without the warm filter of 36 years of hoping he was something other than what he was showing me right now. He was not having a bad night. He was not lashing out from pain. He was comfortable. He was relaxed. He was saying what he had always thought, in a house I had paid for, at a table I had set, eating food I had made, and he was comfortable. That was the thing that undid me. Not the words. The comfort. I stood up slowly, because my knees have been an issue for a few years now. Too many years of carrying groceries and children and everything else that needed carrying. I took my napkin from my lap, folded it neatly, and set it beside my plate. "Good night, sweetheart," I said to Grace, who reached her small arms up toward me. I kissed her head and breathed in the smell of her, clean and warm, that specific sweetness that only very young children have. Then I picked up my cardigan from the back of my chair. "Mom," Savannah rose, "you don't have to leave." "I know," I said. "I want to." I walked to the front door. I did not slam it. I did not make a speech, but I did stop for one moment in the hallway, hand resting on the doorframe, eyes on the framed photograph of Derek at 17. The frame I had bought. The photo I had chosen. 4.5 feet from the floor, because he had once said higher looked pretentious. I thought, I built this, every piece of it. And then I walked out into the September night and drove home. I did not cry on the drive home. I thought I would. The first 10 minutes I kept waiting for it. The tight throat, the blurring vision, the release I had always eventually allowed myself. But it didn't come. My hands were steady on the wheel. The radio played something low and instrumental, and I drove through the familiar streets with the strange sensation of seeing them differently, as if I had left a house where the lighting was wrong and stepped into something clearer. My own house was small, and it was mine. Mortgage paid 3 years ago, deed in my name alone, every room reflecting 40 years of my own taste. I made tea. Not the chamomile I usually reached for at night, the kind designed to soften and quiet everything down. I made black tea, strong, no sugar, and sat down at the kitchen table where a particular drawer had been sitting beneath my right hand for years without my really thinking about it. I opened it now. I don't know exactly what made me reach for it. Some part of me that had known, for longer than I admitted, that a drawer like this needed to exist. I had been putting things in it quietly, unhurriedly, the way you prepare for a storm you hope won't come but plan for anyway. Statements, receipts, documents, a folder of papers that told, in the cold, plain language of documents, a story I had never let myself read in full. The mortgage on 412 Birchwood Lane, opened in my name, payments drawn from my account. Derek listed as resident, not owner. The title on the Ford Escape, Margaret Ann Holloway. Current registration, current insurance, my name on every line. Bank statements going back 5 years. The $18,000 I had quietly transferred to pay off his credit card when he was 28, because he'd called me on a Sunday night sounding like a man going under, and I had believed completely and without hesitation that it was the last time. The $3,400 for the transmission repair, the $1,200 for the security deposit on the apartment before the house, the recurring transfers, modest enough individually, substantial enough accumulated, that I had long since stopped adding up because adding them up would have required me to then decide what to do about the sum. I spread the papers across the table. Furniture, he had called me. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about the boy who had cried at his grandmother's funeral, so undone by grief that I had held him for an hour in the church parking lot while everyone else went to the reception. The boy who had called me from college at 2 a.m, not because anything was wrong, just because he couldn't sleep and wanted to hear my voice. The boy I had held for 16 hours of labor, who had gripped my finger in the delivery room with a ferocity that made the nurse laugh. That boy and the man at that dinner table. I had been treating them as the same person for decades, and they were not. They had not been for a very long time. The man at the table had replaced the boy so gradually that I hadn't noticed until tonight, when he had looked at me with absolute ease and called me furniture, and the boy was simply nowhere in that face at all. I closed the folder. Opened my laptop. Patricia Webb, Family and Property Law. I had met her once at a free legal advice morning at the library, one of those workshops they held for seniors, which I had attended purely out of curiosity and left with her card tucked in my wallet, something I could not have explained at the time. I understood it now. I sent her an email at 11:47 that night. I told her I needed an appointment as soon as possible. I told her I had documentation. I told her I knew exactly what I owned, and I needed someone to help me understand what to do about it. Then I closed the laptop and sat in my kitchen, in my house, in the quiet that was entirely mine, and felt something clarify inside me the way a snow globe clarifies after the shaking stops. Not anger, not grief, something colder and more permanent than either. Resolve. I slept well that night, not because things were fine. Things were not fine. But there is a particular peace that comes when you stop pretending that something is other than what it is. I had been carrying a story about my son for 36 years, a story where love and sacrifice would eventually be recognized, where patience would be rewarded. I had been carrying that story the way you carry a heavy piece of furniture up a long flight of stairs, convinced that when you reach the top, it will have been worth it. I had set it down, and it turned out that empty felt a great deal like free. In the morning, I made strong coffee and opened the drawer again. The house at 412 Birchwood Lane, from the moment the first payment cleared, had belonged to me. The car Derek drove, to work, to dinner, to whatever life he was living inside the one I had funded, it belonged to me. The name on every bill, every mortgage statement, every insurance renewal, mine. He had been living in my property, driving my vehicle, and calling me furniture. I picked up the phone and called Patricia Webb. Her assistant answered on the second ring and offered me an appointment for Wednesday morning. I said Wednesday morning was perfect. When I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where the maple tree I had planted 12 years ago had grown taller than the fence. I had planted that, too. I poured a second cup of coffee and thought, it's time to start taking things back. Not from anger, not from spite, from clarity. Patricia Webb's office was not what I expected. I had imagined dark wood and diplomas arranged for maximum impression. What I found instead was a clean, spare room on the second floor of a building on Maple Street, with good light and very few decorations. One framed print on the wall, a single line drawing of a bird in flight. Nothing sentimental about it. A desk covered in organized stacks of paper that gave the impression not of chaos, but of active intelligence. Patricia herself was in her early 50s, dark-rimmed glasses, silver threading through dark hair she wore pulled back without fuss. She had the quality I have always most respected in professionals. She did not perform competence. She simply possessed it. She stood when I came in, shook my hand once, firmly, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit," she said. "Tell me." So I did. I told her about Sunday dinner, about the word furniture and the ease with which it had been delivered. I told her about the drawer and the documents and the years of quiet accumulation I had never fully examined until the night it all finally made sense. I spoke for perhaps 10 minutes without interruption, and Patricia listened the way very good attorneys listen, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually taking it in, filing it, understanding it. When I finished, she opened the folder I had set on her desk and read without speaking for 4 minutes. I watched the clock on her wall, not from impatience, but because I needed something neutral to look at while she read through the architecture of my son's life, the one I had quietly and apparently invisibly constructed beneath him. Then she closed the folder and looked at me over her glasses. "Margaret," she said, "you haven't been helping your son. You've been carrying him. There is a meaningful legal difference. I understand that now. The property on Birchwood Lane, you're the sole owner of record. The mortgage draws from your account. His name does not appear on the deed." "Correct." "The vehicle." "Ford Escape, 2019. Title in my name. Insurance in my name. I've been paying maintenance for 5 years." She made a note. "And the financial transfers?" "I have records going back to 2011. She looked at me steadily. "You've been very organized for someone who wasn't planning anything." "I was planning," I said. "I just didn't know what I was planning for until recently." A small pause. Then Patricia set down her pen, folded her hands on the desk, and gave me the kind of direct look that I imagine costs her clients several $100s just for the clarity of it. "I'm going to give you 2 options," she said. "One involves mediation, a structured conversation, an attempt at a voluntary resolution. The other involves legal action to reclaim your property and formally withdraw financial support." She paused. "Which would you like to discuss first?" I did not hesitate. "The second one." She reached for a fresh legal pad. "Then let's begin," she said. We spent 2 hours in that office. By the time I left, I had a clear understanding of what I owned, what I was legally entitled to reclaim, and what steps would follow. Patricia would draft a formal revocation of financial support, notarized and delivered. She would prepare the documentation to transfer mortgage responsibility. She would issue, when the time came, a 30-day notice to vacate, official, signed, impossible to misinterpret. "He'll call you," she said as I gathered my folder. "I know. He'll be angry first, then frightened, then he'll try to negotiate. I know that too. Are you prepared for all 3? I thought about Sunday dinner, about the ease on his face, about the napkin Deborah had dabbed her mouth with, the one I had bought. "I've been prepared for years," I said. "I just didn't know it." Patricia walked me to the door. At the threshold, she paused. "One more thing. I do some background work on all property cases. Standard procedure. There may be information that comes up in the process that surprises you." "What kind of information?" "I don't know yet," she said. But I want you to be ready for the possibility that this situation is more complicated than it appears. I thought about Deborah settling into my chair at the head of the table. I'm ready, I said. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I had imagined that doing the right thing would feel like a battle. It turned out it felt more like exhaling. Then Savannah called around 4 on Wednesday evening and asked if she could come over. Her voice had the careful quietness of someone carrying something heavy and not sure how to set it down. She arrived just after 6, still in her school clothes, a manila envelope tucked under her arm. She didn't take off her jacket. She stood in my kitchen the way people stand when they're delivering news they've been sitting on too long, slightly forward, like the words have weight and momentum. Mom, she said, there's something I need to show you. I've had it for 2 years and I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, but... She stopped, put the envelope on the table. I'm sorry I waited. I opened it. Inside, a series of screenshots, text message exchanges printed on regular paper, the timestamps still visible in the corners. A group thread. 3 participants, Derek, Richard, and Deborah. I will not reproduce every word here, because some of it was so precisely aimed at the most private parts of my dignity that I am not yet ready to repeat it. But the shape of it was clear. The thread dated back almost 3 years. It was, in plain terms, a management plan. Deborah had started it. We need to be smarter about how we handle Margaret. Then later, as long as the house is in her name, we just have to keep her feeling needed. And Derek, my son, had replied in the comfortable shorthand of someone speaking freely among people who agreed with him. Exactly. She'll keep paying as long as she thinks she's helping. I read it twice. The second time, I noticed Richard, mostly just agreeing, offering the occasional quiet affirmation with the passivity of a man who had decided that going along was easier than objecting. And Derek threaded throughout. Not reluctant, not conflicted. Engaged. She brought up the mortgage again. I told her I'd look into refinancing. That bought another 6 months. I set the papers down. He knew exactly what he was doing, I said. It was not a question. Yes, Savannah said. I'm so sorry, Mom. I looked at the papers for another moment. I thought about the dealership 3 years ago, Derek's ribs through his jacket when he hugged me, the way I had cried the whole way home with relief, because I believed love had won something that day. It had not been a rescue. It had been a transaction, and I had been the only one who didn't know. It's not your fault, I told Savannah, who had started to cry quietly. You protected me as long as you could. Now we protect differently. She wiped her eyes. What are you going to do? I folded the papers back into the envelope and slid it into my own folder, alongside the deed and the title and the bank records. Exactly what I told Patricia, I said. I'm going to take back what's mine. I had not planned to go on Thursday morning. Patricia had said to give it a day, let the formal process begin cleanly. But at 6:45, I woke up with a sudden absolute clarity that felt less like a decision and more like a deadline I had already missed. I dressed, dark slacks, the gray wool sweater I wear when I want to feel solid, sensible shoes. I took the folder from the kitchen table and drove to Birchwood Lane in the early September light, windows down, radio off, not rehearsing a single word. The driveway was empty. The Ford Escape, my Ford Escape, sat at the curb with a thin film of road dust on the hood that told me he hadn't run it through a wash in weeks. I knocked at 7:45. It took a full minute, then footsteps, and the door opened. Derek stood in the frame in a flannel shirt and sweatpants, hair uncombed, eyes carrying the specific blankness of a man woken before he was ready. He blinked at me once, then twice. Mom, what are you... Keys, I said. My voice was even. I held out my hand, palm up, the way you extend your hand to receive something that was always yours. He blinked again. What? The house keys, the car key, both sets. He stared at me. Then, with the contempt of a man who cannot believe he is being inconvenienced this early, he laughed, short and dismissive. You're not serious. I did not move. I did not repeat myself. I simply held his gaze with the steadiness of a woman who had spent the last 3 days getting very serious indeed. The laugh faded. Mom, his voice shifted, finding a new register. Not quite alarm, but close to it. What is this? What are you doing? I reached into my folder and withdrew the deed to 412 Birchwood Lane. I held it up so he could see his address at the top, and below it in the clear, indifferent typeface of legal documents, the name of the property's owner, Margaret Ann Holloway. "You've been living in my house, Derek, driving my car." I lowered the paper. "As of today, I need both back." He stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind him. Across the street, Ruth Alderman, his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher in her mid-70s, was out with a watering can, moving with the careful slowness of someone trying very hard not to appear to be paying attention. "Jesus, Mom, you can't just show up here and—" "I can," I said. "And I am. You gave me this house." His voice cracked on the word gave. "You can't take back something you gave." I withdrew the title to the Ford Escape. I read the owner's name aloud. He knew it before I finished. "I didn't give you anything," I said calmly. "I paid for things and put them in my name, and I told myself that was love. It wasn't. It was a loan that was never going to be repaid, and I'm done pretending otherwise. You're doing this because of one dinner." His voice had risen. Ruth's watering can had gone still. "One bad night and you're blowing up everything?" "No," I said. "I'm doing this because of a group text message where you and Deborah discussed how to keep me feeling needed so I'd keep paying your bills." I watched his face carefully. "I have the screenshots, Derek. 3 years of them." The color left his face completely and quickly. He opened his mouth, closed it. "As long as the house is in her name," I said quietly, "we just have to keep her feeling needed." I held his gaze. "That was you, May of 2021, 11:42 at night." The silence between us was long and without anything comfortable in it. Then he said in a voice stripped of its usual performance, "Mom, the keys, Derek." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he went inside. I heard the sound of keys being lifted from a hook, the same hook I had installed myself on a Sunday afternoon 3 years ago, because he kept losing them. I had bought the rack. I had put it up. Of course I had. He came back, held out both sets. His hand was not steady. I took them. The car key, the house key, the small brass one for the back gate he had never used. I turned toward the street. "Deborah says you're losing it," he said behind me. "She says this is about control." "Then go talk to Deborah about how the boutique is doing these days," I said, turning back once, briefly. "Ask her if the numbers add up." I watched something move across his face, a confusion too specific to be genuine, and a fear beneath it that was entirely real. I didn't explain. I walked to the Ford Escape, unlocked it, got in, adjusted the mirror, started the engine. In the rear view, Derek stood in the driveway with his arms at his sides, watching me back out. Ruth Alderman had set down her watering can entirely and was no longer pretending. I pulled onto Birchwood Lane and drove away without looking back. The bank was cool and quiet the way banks are in the mornings before the weight of the day has fully arrived. Angela Morse, who handled my accounts, was a practical woman of about 40 who had always treated me with the brisk respect of someone who does not waste anyone's time, including her own. She looked up from her desk when I came in, and something in my expression or my folder communicated that this was not a routine visit. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "what can I do for you today?" "I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payments on 412 Birchwood Lane," I said, "and formally document the transfer of payment responsibility." She walked me through it carefully. The process would trigger a formal notification to the address. If no payment was made within 60 days, the property would enter default proceedings. "I understand all of that," I said. Angela looked at me steadily, not with pity. I would have found pity unbearable just then, with a kind of professional recognition. She had seen this before, I realized. Not this exact situation, but this particular threshold. The moment when someone who has been paying for something they shouldn't finally stops. She stamped the transfer document. Thick red ink. Payment responsibility transferred. She slid it across the desk. I picked it up, folded it, placed it in my folder. "Are you all right?" she asked, with the careful neutrality of someone who means the question sincerely but understands its limits. "Yes," I said. "For the first time in quite a while, I actually am." I walked out into the September morning. My phone started ringing before I reached my car. Derek. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. "What did you do?" His voice was tight and climbing. "I just got an alert. The mortgage payment failed. What is going on?" "I stopped paying," I said. "You live there. You pay for it." "You can't just—" "Mom, I have a life here. I have bills. You can't—" I can, I said. I just did. This is insane. You're burning everything down because your feelings got hurt at dinner. I thought about the group text. May of 2021, 11:42 at night. No, Derek, I said quietly. I'm stopping a pattern that should have stopped years ago. Sunday dinner wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time you forgot to pretend. Silence. Then, Deborah told me you'd do something like this eventually. Then Deborah has been preparing you for something I have every legal right to do, I said. Ask her about the boutique while you're at it. Ask her about the books she's been keeping. Another silence, sharper this time. What does that mean? It means you should have a thorough conversation with Deborah about the financial arrangements she has you co-signed on, I said carefully, before someone else does. I hung up. My hands were not shaking. My voice had not broken. I sat in the parking lot of First Heritage Bank on a Wednesday morning in September and felt, with a clarity I had not experienced in years, exactly who I was and exactly what I was doing. I was not being cruel. I was not being dramatic. I was a woman reclaiming her own life, and I was just getting started. Patricia called me on a Thursday, not with urgency. Patricia Webb was not a woman who communicated in urgency. She called the way she did everything, directly, without preamble, with the efficiency of someone who respects your time because she respects her own. I have some information, she said. Can you come in this afternoon? I was in my garden when she called, kneeling beside the raised bed where I grow tomatoes every summer, doing the kind of quiet, unhurried work that had become, in the days since Sunday dinner, something close to meditation. There is something clarifying about tending things that grow on their own schedule, indifferent to human drama. I'll be there at 2, I said. Patricia's office had the same clean light, the same organized stacks, the same bird in flight print on the wall. But today there was a second folder on her desk, slimmer than mine, with a quality about it, something in the way she placed her hand on top of it before speaking, that told me it contained information that had changed the shape of what she understood. I want you to be prepared for this, she said. All right. She opened the folder. Deborah Payne, Deborah's Styles Boutique, LLC, registered 2018. 4 locations attempted, 2 opened, both operating at a loss. 3 years of quarterly tax filings that Patricia's contact in her firm's accounting division had identified as, in the careful professional language she used, significantly irregular. How irregular? I asked. $134,000 in unpaid federal business taxes, Patricia said, not including penalties and accumulated interest, which would bring the total considerably higher. She turned a page. She's been filing personal expenses as business deductions for years. Vacations logged as supplier visits. Clothing, jewelry, spa treatments, all filed under business operations. Her accountant either didn't know or didn't ask questions. I sat with that for a moment. And Derek, I said. He co-signed a business expansion loan in 2022, Patricia said. $45,000. His signature is on 3 of the founding documents. She looked at me over her glasses. If the IRS moves forward with an audit, and my understanding is that they are already in preliminary review, Derek is not a bystander. He is a named party. His signature carries legal weight regardless of what he understood when he signed. I looked at the documents spread across her desk. Deborah had not only been using my son to manage me, she had been using him as scaffolding for a financial structure that was quietly, steadily collapsing, and when it fell, it would fall on him too. She knew what she was doing when she put his name on those documents, I said. Patricia did not assign motive without evidence. She was too precise for that. But she held my gaze for a moment in a way that confirmed what I already knew. The IRS was already circling, she said quietly. I simply made sure they had a clear address. You didn't? I pointed them toward publicly available filings and suggested a closer look was warranted. A small pause. That is entirely within the scope of responsible legal practice. I sat back in my chair. Outside Patricia's window, a maple tree was beginning to turn. The very first edge of fall color, just at the tips, the slow fire that starts before anyone is ready to call it autumn. He had no idea what she'd pulled him into, I said. Probably not, Patricia agreed, which is not the same as being innocent of it. What happens now? Now we wait. The notice to vacate goes out tomorrow. The mortgage transfer is already documented, And Deborah's situation will unfold on its own timeline, which I suspect will be faster than she expects. She closed the folder. You don't need to do anything else, Margaret. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop holding something up and let gravity work. I thought about 36 years of holding things up. Let gravity work, I said. Patricia almost smiled. Exactly. The notice went out on a Friday, by courier, official, and signed and real in the way that only paper delivered by hand can be real. The following Saturday, I drove to Birchwood Lane and parked half a block away, engine off, windows down. I had not planned to stay long. I simply needed to witness the thing I'd done in order to believe I had actually done it. A moving truck was parked at the curb. 2 men in gray t-shirts carried boxes down the front walk with the efficient disinterest of people who move other people's lives for a living and have long since stopped wondering about the stories inside the boxes. A lamp I recognized, the brass one I'd bought at an estate sale and given Derek when he first moved in, was wrapped in moving blankets and carried out with no more ceremony than a bag of groceries. The sofa appeared around 11. I had bought it at a furniture store on Route 17 on a Tuesday afternoon, chosen it because the cushions were deep and the color was a warm, forgiving gray. It was wine-stained now along one arm, and the right front leg had been repaired with something that didn't quite match. It sat crooked on the curb in the September sun, patient and discarded, and I felt a grief for it that was simpler and more honest than the grief I felt for anything else that morning. Across the street, Ruth Alderman stood at her fence with her coffee mug, no longer making any pretense of doing something else. The red notice was still on the front door. Notice of eviction, termination of tenancy, block letters, the kind of language that does not allow for misinterpretation. Derek came out at 11:30 carrying a cardboard box with a split bottom, holding it together from underneath with both hands. Unshaved. The same flannel shirt from the morning I came for the keys, as if he had not quite managed, in the days between, to attend to anything as ordinary as laundry. He looked up. Our eyes met across the length of the block. The distance was perhaps 60 feet, and I did not close it. I simply looked at him, steadily, without animosity, without the performance of indifference, the way you look at someone you have known longer than almost anyone else in your life, and whom you are finally, with great sadness and greater clarity, seeing accurately. He looked away first. He carried his broken box to the truck, said something to one of the movers, did not look in my direction again. I started the car and drove home. 3 weeks passed. I did not call Derek. I did not reach out to Richard. I tended my garden, visited my grandchildren, had dinner with Savannah on a Tuesday evening where we talked about her new role in her daughter's upcoming birthday and whether the maple in my backyard needed trimming. The conversation had, for the first time in years, the quality of 2 people simply present with each other, rather than managing something unspoken between them. The news about Deborah reached me in pieces, the way these things do. First from Savannah, who had heard from a mutual acquaintance that the boutique had closed overnight. Not a gradual winding down, but a sudden, complete cessation, the kind that happens when accounts are frozen and options disappear faster than pride can cover them. The website went dark. The social media accounts vanished. 2 women from the tennis club who had purchased what they believed to be imported European scarves discovered that the labels had been removed from mass-manufactured merchandise and posted their findings with the particular fury of people who feel their taste has been insulted alongside their wallet. Then from Patricia, who called on a Wednesday morning to tell me, with the contained satisfaction of a professional who has watched a complex mechanism function exactly as designed, that the IRS audit had moved from preliminary to active. Deborah's merchant accounts were suspended. Richard's name, which appeared on several documents as a secondary guarantor, had been flagged for review. And Derek, whose signature was on that expansion loan, who had co-signed documents for a business he had likely never examined closely, was now standing in the middle of a financial investigation with no safety net beneath him, because I had finally stopped being one. I did not feel triumph when Patricia told me this. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter and more complicated. A grief for the version of my son I had believed in for so long, sitting alongside the cold, necessary recognition that the version I had believed in had perhaps never fully existed outside my own stubborn hope. I watered my tomatoes. I called Savannah. I made dinner for one and ate it at my kitchen table with a library book propped against the salt shaker, and the evening was calm and ordinary and entirely, completely mine. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 3.5 weeks after the eviction. I saw the return address before I opened it. Richard Payne, with a street address I didn't recognize. Somewhere in Millbrook, a town 20 minutes east, which told me before I read a single word that he had moved out of the house he had shared with Deborah. I stood at my kitchen counter and opened it. 4 pages. Handwritten, in Richard's careful, slightly cramped cursive that I had not seen in 20 years but recognized immediately, the way you recognize a voice you haven't heard in a long time. He did not begin with an apology. He began with an admission, which was harder and more honest than an apology and cost him considerably more. He wrote that he had known. Not everything. Not the full extent of the tax situation. But he had known that Deborah was managing me. He had known she talked about me in ways he should have challenged. He had known Derek repeated things she told him, and he hadn't corrected it. He wrote that he had told himself it wasn't his place, that I was strong enough and didn't need him to defend me. He wrote, "The truth is I chose convenient. Going along was easier than objecting, and I watched you carry everything while they called you nothing, and I am ashamed of that in a way I don't expect you to forgive, but feel I have to say." The middle pages were an accounting of moments he had witnessed and done nothing about. The dinners where Derek had been dismissive. The comments Deborah had made in his presence that he had laughed at or let pass. 22 years of marriage and what followed, and he was only now, having lost everything comfortable, finding his honesty. The last page was brief. "Derek doesn't know I'm writing this. This isn't a negotiation, and it isn't an attempt to rebuild anything. It's just me, finally being honest about what I saw and what I failed to do. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from all of us." He signed it simply, Richard. I folded the letter and held it for a long moment, standing at my kitchen counter in the October light. I didn't know what to do with 22 years of marriage finally telling the truth. I didn't know what to do with the fact that it had taken him losing everything to find the courage for 4 honest pages. I wasn't ready to decide what it meant or what, if anything, came next. So I put the letter somewhere safe, in the front section of the drawer, beneath a photograph of Savannah at age 7 and a birthday card Grace had made me last spring out of construction paper and too much glue. The things that were true and needed to be kept. Savannah's daughter turned 7 on a Saturday in October, and the party was small and warm. A few children, a kitchen table covered in craft supplies and frosting, the happy, wonderful mess of a child who has been genuinely loved, celebrating that love in a room full of people who mean it. I arrived early and helped with the cake. Savannah and I worked side by side in her kitchen the way we have always worked. Quietly, efficiently, without needing to fill the silence. I thought, not for the first time, that whatever I had done right in my life as a mother, I had done most of it with her. Derek arrived late. I heard the door, and then Savannah's voice in the hallway, careful and neutral, the voice of someone managing an entrance, and then footsteps, and then he was in the kitchen doorway. He looked diminished. That is the only honest word for it. Not in height or physical presence, but in the quality of a man who has been carrying a performance for years and has recently had to set it down. The easy contempt was gone from his face. What was left looked older and less certain, and in its uncertainty, more recognizable than anything I had seen from him in years. He was holding a bottle of wine and a small wrapped present, and both seemed to require some effort to hold naturally. He greeted Savannah, crouched down to speak to Grace, who regarded him with the frank, unedited assessment of a 7-year-old, and then ran back to her friends. He straightened up. Then he looked at me. I was standing at the kitchen counter with a dish towel in my hands, and I did not move toward him. I did not open my arms or manufacture a warmth I had not yet found my way back to. I simply stood and looked at him. My son, my difficult and still beloved son, 36 years old, and finally perhaps beginning to understand what that number requires of a person. He crossed the kitchen slowly. "Mom," he said. "Derek?" He stopped a few feet away. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being your floor." He looked down briefly, then back up. "I've been thinking about it every day, actually." I waited. "I don't know how to start over," he said. And there was no performance in it, no angle I could detect, just the raw, slightly frightened honesty of a man stating a fact about himself. "I don't have a plan. I don't have anything figured out. He stopped, tried again. "I was wrong. About what I said at dinner. About a lot of things. I was wrong." I looked at my son. I thought about the boy in the church parking lot, undone by grief, leaning into me because I was the solid thing in the world when everything else had shifted. I thought about 16 hours of labor and a small hand gripping my finger. I thought about 36 years of loving something so completely that you forget to examine whether it is loving you back. I thought about the group text, May of 2021. "I know you were wrong," I said. My voice was not cold and it was not warm. It was simply clear. Saying so is the beginning, not the end. He nodded slowly. "I'm not going to be your floor, Derek. Not anymore." That was never what either of us actually needed it to be. I held his gaze. "But I am your mother. I have always been your mother. Whether you become someone worth being a mother to, that is the work in front of you, not mine, yours." He stood with that for a moment. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." He did not embrace me. I did not reach for him. But something passed between us in that kitchen. Something truthful and undecorated, and therefore more real than any of the performances we had been giving each other for years. He went to sit at the far end of the table, quiet and smaller than I had ever seen him, and the party continued around us, and Grace blew out her candles, and the children cheered. I sang Happy Birthday with the rest of them, and somewhere in the middle of the second verse, I felt it arrive. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet permanence of something that has been traveling toward you for a long time and has finally, simply, arrived. Peace. Not the peace of things being resolved, because they were not resolved and might not be for a long time. Not the peace of forgiveness, because forgiveness is not a single moment but a long practice, and I was only at the beginning of it. But the peace of a woman who knows what she owns, what she has built, what she will no longer carry for someone else, and what she is, after everything, still capable of. That peace. That night I sat by the window in my living room with a cup of tea gone slightly cool, and the street outside was quiet, and the maple tree in my backyard had lost a few leaves to the October wind so that they lay gold and still on the grass I had planted and tended. I took out my phone. I opened my photos. Scrolled back to the picture I had saved years ago in my favorites. Derek at the dealership, leaning against the hood of the Ford Escape with a smile that had looked, at the time, like a boy who believed again. I had saved it because I believed it too. I had believed, standing in that parking lot, that love was enough. That sacrifice given freely would eventually teach someone how to value what they'd been given. I had been wrong about that. I moved the photo out of my favorites. Did not delete it. It was still true. Still a record of something that had happened, a son and a mother and a car on an ordinary afternoon. But it was not a hope anymore. It was just a photograph. I scrolled forward to the recent pictures. Grace with frosting on her nose. Savannah laughing at something off camera. My tomatoes in late summer, heavy and red. The garden I had built from nothing, that grew and failed and grew again every year without needing to be convinced of its own worth. I set the phone on the table. Outside, the October wind moved through the maple and lifted a few more leaves into the air, brilliant and brief and entirely unashamed of their own falling. I thought about what Patricia had said, in her office with the bird in flight print on the wall. You don't need to throw punches. You just need to remind people that you can. I had not thrown a single punch. I had simply stopped catching everything before it hit the ground. And it turned out that was enough. It turned out that had always been more than enough. I finished my tea. I turned off the lamp. And in the dark, in my house, in the life I had paid for and tended and never quite let myself simply live, I breathed in and I breathed out, and I did not wait for the phone to ring. I was already home.